Hi everyone, I'm Ros Cardinal, Managing Director of Shaping Change and creator of the Women's Leader Archetypes. And the topic that I'm going to talk to you about today is leading people through change. A really interesting statistic for you is that a staggering 2/3 of organisational change fails to reach its stated objectives. That's a massive number. You know, that's really telling us that the majority of change efforts are actually failing. So let's think about why they actually fail. What I tend to find is that they fail because people don't embrace change. One of the things that happens in change projects inside an organisation is there's a time lag between when the change is implemented and when the people buy in and actually get on board with the change. And if there's not a very strong driver for people to change, what happens is they, forget it, they go back to the way they were doing things, they resist it, it doesn't happen. I remember many years ago, and this is something that, looking back on it now with all the things that I now know, I'm not proud of what I did. I was in an organisational change where, as a somebody that change was happening too, with the implementation of a new document management system. And for me, it wasn't intuitive. I had what I thought was a perfectly good system that I used to use on the shared drive in the organisation, where I had my files and my folders organised in a way that made sense to me. When the new document management system came along, it was a particular protocol for filing documents, and to me it didn't make any sense. I tried using it, I was struggling to find my documents, I found it very, very difficult. And so what I did was, instead of saving my documents into the document management system, I kept on saving them onto the shared drive. Now, after a while, a lot of people did this, I wasn't the only one, but after a while it came to the attention of the people who managed all of the documents in the organisation. And so they had all of the shared drives disabled, so you couldn't put documents on them. So then lots of people in the organisation started putting documents on their C drives on their computers. And again, after a while, that became common knowledge, and the C drives on computers were then disabled, so you couldn't save anything to them. And what lots of people did was they went out and actually bought themselves external hard drives so they could continue to share their documents save their documents on their external hard drives and ignore the document management system altogether. Now, that's an example of people resisting change. It's one of those things where people didn't buy in, they didn't understand it, they didn't understand the reason for it. But the most important thing, and this is what happens, this is a big reason why people resist change, is there's a myth that people don't like change, and that's simply not true. People love change as long as they initiate it. People, if we didn't like change, we'd never get our hair cut, we'd never buy a new car, we'd never change jobs, we'd never have children, we'd never buy new clothes. People love change as long as they're in control. The key thing that people are resisting when they resist change is not the change itself. What they're resisting is loss. People as a species are hardwired for loss aversion. We hate loss, we hate losing things. In fact, losing something makes us twice as miserable as gaining that thing makes us happy. So what's actually going on for people is they're losing things when we announce a change inside an organisation. And what people are tracking for is what's in it for me. So they're looking at, is the change going to be good for me or bad for me? If they detect that they're going to gain something from the change, they'll support it. If they detect loss, they're going to resist the change. And the interesting part is, if they don't know, if they don't have enough information to make their minds up, they'll resist change until they have that information. So at the beginning of change, what often happens is we don't have all the information. So because people are hardwired to resist change unless they know what's in it for them, we set ourselves up at the beginning for people to resist the change. There's an interesting activity that I do when I run change programs, and what I do, it's a bit of fun, but there's a lesson behind it, is I get people to turn to the person next to them, just have a quick look at them, introduce yourself, and then turn away from them and make 3 changes to your appearance. It might be things like roll your sleeves up, tuck your hair behind your ears, whatever it is, but make 3 changes. And then get the people to turn back to each other, and they've got to pick the things that the other person changed. And then I ask for a show of hands as to who picked all 3, who picked 2, who picked 1, etc. And then I ask people, what does that tell you about change? Now, they tell me all the usual things, that often we don't notice it, the change can be quite subtle, so on and so forth. But that's not the actual lesson out of the activity. What I do is I move on to something else for a bit, and then I'll backtrack to it, and I'll say, so who in the room has now gone back to the way they were before I asked you to change? And if we put aside the practicalities of things like I need my glasses to be able to see, or, I wanted to put my scarf back on so I didn't lose it, people will tell me I went back to the way I was when I walked in because that's what I chose to do. I chose to dress this way this morning. I wanted my sleeves rolled down, so as soon as I didn't have to roll them up, I rolled them back down again. And that's exactly what happens in organisational changes. Leaders don't pay attention to the change for long enough for it to bed in. So people will change when a facilitator, for example, says, can you please do this activity? But then as soon as I stop paying attention to the activity, they'll change back to the way they were. And it's a really big lesson for change inside organisations. So when we look at loss, when a change happens in an organisation, there's a number of things that people can lose. There's things like job security. That kind of goes without saying when we announce restructures or redundancies. People lose that sense of job security. They can lose their sense of psychological comfort and security as well, their sense of control over things. Sense of control over their own future is a big one that people will resist. There's often the loss of a sense of purpose and meaning. Quite often if people's jobs change, they lose that sense of connection to what they did and the connection to feeling like they added value. They lose their competence a lot of the time. If we ask people to do something new, there's always a learning curve where people don't feel competent as they work their way through the learning how to do something new. And going back to my document management example, that was exactly how I felt. Whenever I couldn't find a document that I needed, I felt incompetent. I really struggled. It was that sort of sense of, I should know how to do this and I'm just not getting it. It made me feel stupid a lot of the time, and that was part of the big reason, when I look back on it now, that was the big reason for my resistance. Excuse me. People can lose social connections. When you start to disrupt teams and move people around, we lose that sense of belonging and connecting to people in our team who we view as like family. So again, that sort of sense of being part of something goes for people. We can often find that people feel like they're losing territory. I had a really great example somebody told me about recently about an organisation that moved offices, and just after the move one evening, somebody was, finishing up late, and they found a manager who was walking around the floor and going into everybody else's office and counting the number of ceiling tiles they had in their office. And what he was doing was he was trying to figure out who had the biggest office and whether or not he had the biggest one by, the amount of floor space was equating to the ceiling tiles, which is it sounds silly, but it's a really good example of people being upset about territory. Loss of, power and influence is a really big one. You find in organisations that there's an unwritten hierarchy that happens. It sits separately from your hierarchical org chart. And what really happens in there is that sort of sense of who do you need to talk to get things done? Who's who in the zoo? Who do we listen to? Who are the influencers? And as soon as you move people around in an organisation, you disrupt all of that, and it becomes difficult for people to get things done. So as an example, I was in an organisation years ago and there was a lot of restructuring and redundancies going on. I dropped my mobile phone in the fire stairs and it broke. It just cracked the screen. And there was a go-to guy called Adam who was the go-to guy for mobile phones, and I'd broken a mobile phone years before that. And all I did was call Adam and say, hey, look, I've just dropped my phone, and he was round at my desk within about 15 or 20 minutes with a spare phone that I could use while he got mine repaired. So dropped my phone in the stairwell, and I just assumed it would be the same process. So I dialed Adam's number and somebody new answered, and they said, look, Adam's not here, he's been made redundant. So I explained the situation and I said, look, I've dropped my phone, the screen's cracked, it seems to work okay, but it's not working as well as it should. And they said to me, okay, well what you need to do is you need to log into our new procurement system and you need to place an order for it. And we put you in the queue, and I can tell you at the moment, because it's not an urgent call, it's probably going to be about 2 weeks before we can get to you. So that sort of loss of people who got things done was something that, the organisation can feel quite strongly about. There's loss of colleagues and friends, which again goes without saying if you disrupt teams and move people around. The loss of expert status can be an interesting one too. So years ago, again in a change process, there was an organisation that I was involved with who were changing their billing system. They'd had their old billing system for well over a decade. And there was a guy who was an expert in the credit process. He was hierarchically the same level as other people in his team, but he was kind of the go-to guy for anything related to credit. And in the new billing system, he was resisting the change. He was really resisting the change. He was bad-mouthing the system. He was telling everybody else it was complete rubbish. And in the end, he ended up leaving the organisation because he was so against the system and he couldn't come to terms with it. But what was really going on, if we dug a little deeper, was it wasn't the system that was the problem. The problem was his loss of his expertise and his expert status. Obviously, he was very connected to that feeling of being competent, being the go-to person, having that expert status as the expert in the credit process. So hindsight being a wonderful thing, what could have been done for him is he could have been brought into the change team maybe. He could have been brought in to help decide which system was going to be bought, or he could be brought in as a super user or a trainer so that he then developed expertise and was able to train other people in that. And that would have given him that sense of expert status back again, which is what he was really looking for and what the loss was for him. People can lose trust. They can lose trust in the organisation and trust in the organisational leaders. This sense of, you know, you've made all these changes, how do we know you're not going to make more? Or we can't trust you. One of the things that happens in organisational change is people jump straight to assuming that their leaders are plotting terrible things. Hey, Kathy, I've just seen you jump on. Welcome. So this idea that leaders are plotting against us all the time. So people feel that sense of loss of trust in the organisation. And often there's no trust in the leaders to deliver the outcomes of the change in the organisation. I've heard people say in organisations many times to me, this is just another fad, it's just another thing, it's something else management are doing. If we kind of just sit it out, it'll all go away again. You know, it's not really going to stick. And look, resistance to change is an interesting beast. And I did a piece of work once for a business where they asked me, I was doing some work with their people with a program called Thriving in Change. It was helping their people understand the change process for them and what was going to happen and how, really to normalise the change process. It's a very, very successful program. We've run it a lot. People absolutely love it. But in part of the brief for this, I sat down with their change team and I said, tell me a bit about the organisation, what's happening, explain the change to me, and tell me about the resistance that you're experiencing. And they said to me, oh, we're not getting any resistance at all. And, you know, my kind of radar went up, my antennas went up, and I went, okay, that's interesting. So as I went out and I delivered this program, I was talking to the participants about the change. And what was really going on is people said to me that the organisation had had so much failed change in the past that they didn't honestly believe it was going to happen. So that's why there was no resistance to change, because the participants in change honestly believed it wasn't going to get up. It was that sense of there's no need to worry about it, we just kind of park it, it'll just go away, you know, as a lot of things do. They told me about the history of the organisation, and there'd been a lot of failed change over probably 10 to 15 years. And a lot of people had been around for the entire process and had seen change come and fade away many, many times. They honestly didn't believe it was happening. So there's a whole range of reasons why people resist change and, you know, that sort of sense of resisting loss. It's not the change that's the problem, it's the loss that's the problem. So I guess for an activity for you and something to think about as a key takeaway out of this live video is to consider a change that you're going through in the workplace at the moment. Have a think about your team. Think about who's losing something and what are they going to be losing. You know, have a real think about all the things that I've talked about in terms of the things that people can lose during change. Who's losing something? What are they losing? And have a think about how you can maybe balance the scales to reduce the sense of loss, or how can you reframe it so that it turns it into an opportunity for people rather than loss. Because what's really going on when people resist change is they're resisting loss. They don't want to lose something. So if you can show them how it can actually be a gain for them, that's really critically important. And also in change as leaders, one of the things to think about too is what are you losing? It's interesting, particularly at middle management inside organisations, they're kind of the squished layer in the middle where they're not the architects of change, but they're the ones who are expected to lead people through it. And for them, it can be a very difficult time because they're losing things as well. And they've got to maintain that sense of balancing their own needs against the needs of the people in their team and the needs of the organisation. So it's a pretty tough job. All right, so that's the end of this segment. So what I'd like you to do is for those of you watching the replay, if you can just drop a hashtag replay into the comments so that I know that you've seen the video, that'd be absolutely great. If you've got any questions or comments at all, put them in the comments. I will be posting this on other forums other than Facebook, so the comments section will actually be in Facebook. It's on our page, Ros Cardinal is the name of the page. Thank you for joining me. My name's Ros Cardinal. I'm the Managing Director of Shaping Change. Have a really lovely day.